Hello, everyone. It is October 8th and time for another edition of Wednesday with Walton and Reis, brought to you here in video form at thecardinalnation.com and audio available at the Scoops Sports Network and all your favorite podcast apps. Hello again, Kyle.
Hello, Brian. How are you, sir?
Doing great, doing great. Looking forward to another week of 30 minutes or so talking about the Cardinals minor leagues. One of the things that Kyle and I both do is rank prospects, but nobody has a bandwidth. No one person has a bandwidth to understand well prospects across all 30 organizations, and some of the national entities do a pretty good job of that. Baseball America, of course, Keith Law at the Athletic, MLB Pipeline, ESPN, Fangraphs, and others. And so, a lot of times, these entities do a ranking kind of before spring training, do one kind of after the draft, and then another one now at the end of the season. And this past week, both MLB Pipeline and Fangraphs came out with their uh, revised top 100s. I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about the changes that occurred in the two. Starting with Pipeline, they had Weatherholt number 6 before and number 5 now, so not much of a change there. When Doyle was drafted, they placed him initially at 34. Now he's down to 36. I don't think that's anything to do with him. Maybe just some others moving up. Excuse me. But there was a very interesting flip in terms of how they looked at the two top prospect catchers. And I'm not talking about Jimmy Crooks here. I'm talking about Leonardo Bernal and Reniel Rodriguez. Leonardo Bernal dropped from 74 midseason to 92 nationally now, still in the top 100. Reniel Rodriguez made a huge jump from 99 to 55, but again, Pipeline does not and has never had Jimmy Crooks in their top 100. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think Rainiel Rodriguez he's becoming the hot prospect. I think, you prefaced this really brilliantly, Brian. You brought up how every organization, every independent organization that evaluates prospects, they put out a list, and it's important to consider each and every one of them when you are kind of self-evaluating what's going on at the minor league level for the Cardinals. But what also happens is a lot of these guys know each other. A lot of these people know each other. They talk to scouts, not only with Cardinals but with other teams, and all that information comes together to form these lists. And Rainiel Rodriguez did everything you could possibly ask for a prospect to do in order to start climbing the ladder. You can't have the bat or the season that he had without making this kind of noise. And in juxtaposition, you had Leo Bernal, who had a really solid year and kind of ebbed and flowed at a level that Rainiel has not been at yet in Double A. That's when you really start to sort out like the real prospects from maybe some of the pretender prospects. And towards the end of the year, Leo Bernal kind of fell off offensively. But it's just a long season. It's a long grind. So I think this is what happens. I think this is part of the fun of ranking prospect. I think it's part of the fun of doing it, like you said, kind of it's not quarterly. It's almost if you could divide the year into a third. A lot of the
Triannually?
I love that triannually. Thank you, Brian. The triannual. It's usually triannually, and I think it also helps to paint a better picture about the progress that players are making. And I just think I think Rainiel has just been, it really just boils down to the fact that Rainiel just had a year that blew everybody out of the water, both at the plate and behind the plate. And those are the positive things that we were singing. And I think that speaks more to that than anything else.
So let's talk a little bit about Fangraphs. Fangraphs has been very aggressive on the Cardinals system. They had 6 Cardinals among the top 100 compared to 4 at Pipeline. That went up to 7 here in their rankings that came out this past week. And interestingly enough, right after the draft, they had Doyle at 13 and Weatherholt at 23. And now they basically flipped them, and Weatherholt's at 9 and Doyle's at 19. And again, I don't think it's anything about Doyle. He had a very brief start. But Weatherholt, of course, finished very strongly, not only becoming player of the year in the Texas League, but also playing exceptionally well after he joined Memphis. So, no surprises there. But what is a surprise is the new name on the list, on Fangraph's list, is Leonardo Bernal. He wasn't there in July, kind of surprisingly, But all of a sudden they discovered him and dropped him in at number 40. That one was sort of like, wow, what happened there?
Yeah.
Did he really improve that? I don't think he really improved that much during this year. He had an okay year, a good year, but not a year that knocked your socks off. Then they had Rodriguez, and they dropped Rodriguez from 46 to 71, which I thought was very, very odd. It's almost like they somehow switched the name somehow.
Yeah.
And then Crooks is also on their list at 77. And then Quinn Matthews dropped a little bit. And then they still have Tink Hence in the upper 80s. And we all know, Tink Hence's capabilities when he's healthy. Unfortunately, that isn't often enough.
Yeah.
So what's your take on this? Bernal, Rodriguez, then Crooks.
I would love to know. A lot of times, Long and Eric Longenhagen, who pretty well runs the Fangraphs prospect stuff, a lot of times he's super data oriented. Data size. I remember a couple years ago, or not even a couple years ago, it might have been in their mid-season rankings or maybe their preseason rankings. They were ultra aggressive on like Jose Davila, in part because of his size, but because his measurables are really impressive. Um, More aggressive than you were or I was or anybody else on the platform. They tend to take chances, and sometimes these chances kind of come out of the ether. And I think that that's what's happening with Bernal more than anything here. I think that maybe there's a course correction where they realize, oh wait, there's more to this. Bernal's swing data is actually really good when you start to peel it back. That's my understanding at least. And he also makes consistent, solid contact. Uh, there's a lot to really like, including the steps that his defensive makes. There's still some questions about his framing, but you could almost see where if you're more of a data-driven prospect list, where you might step back and up until this point say, I don't know if this guy is a top 100 prospect, and then let the season end, see what he did at Double A, understand what his age was, how he kind of corrected, and you could almost say, all right, this kid probably is a top 50 prospect or a top 100 prospect, or I do think, and I could be wrong about this, I do think they've had him like right outside of the top 100. Sometimes they go super deep, like 150, maybe 200, and I think they've had him in the 150 range. But that is a super aggressive jump, and kind of one that I wish I had a better answer for than the one that I gave.
But, Kyle made a very good point here, folks, and that is that take the time to go beyond just reading the numbers. A lot of times there are descriptions. Other times these folks have chat sessions with readers where they answer questions about the rankings. Use all the resources that are available to you to understand it, rather than maybe just say, I'm going to take all these rankings and average them together or something like that. Because as Kyle pointed out, different people have different ways of looking at these players, whether it's video stats or it's raw stats or it's StatCast stats or whatever it may be. So, it's fun to look at these rankings, and I don't view them badly. I wasn't attacking that as being inconsistent. It was just like, okay, this one caught my attention as being unique. But, not to be lost is, according to Fangraphs, the St. Louis Cardinals have 7 top 100 prospects in baseball, and that's a pretty good place to be.
Yeah, and 3 catchers in that list, which is impressive. We talk a lot about the development in the Cardinals organization, about catchers and how stacked they are with catchers. Well, Jimmy Crooks might not be on the pipeline list, but it's nice to know that somewhere else in a nationally appreciated publication online, nationally respected, there is an additional catcher getting a little extra love, who deserves a little extra love. And also I think it might, if you take a step back and you try to take perspective of it, Brian, and this is where I sometimes get caught up a little too much. It also tells you what exactly like a 77th ranked prospect, a 75 to 100 ranked prospect, can be at the major league level. I think it helps give perspective that those kind of guys aren't gonna come to the major league level and blow the roof off. It's going to take time to continue to develop, and they might not ever become a major league everyday player. They might just be a role player. But I think, Jimmy Crooks in that range is a perfect example of what you can expect, even though, they do the future value, and just like you do, Brian, with the volatility of the future value. I think it also gives you, when you take the number out of it and the words out of it, I think you just have the picture of what that type of prospect and that type of range can be, which I think is very important from a perspective standpoint.
And just to compare and contrast, certainly the people at Baseball America know what they've been doing. They've been doing it for a long, long time. Their most recent rankings, they haven't refreshed since after the draft, but right after the draft, they had only 2 Cardinals ranked, Weatherhold at 5, but Doyle was at 66 and nobody else. Who's right, who's wrong? Only time will tell.
Yeah.
But I want to come back to a point you made, Kyle, and it's one that we've talked a little bit about, but you're going to get a chance to be behind Bloom.
Ooh.
What do you do with the catching position? We've seen Jimmy Crooks now. He's gotten a month in the majors. He's got his feet wet. Didn't knock the cover off the ball, but didn't embarrass himself either. They've got a couple of guys that are incumbents in Pozo and Pajes. And you've got Ivan Herrera, who's going home, and his winter assignment, other than rehab his shoulder, is to work on his catching defense. What do you do? Do you do anything yet? What do you do with the position?
Brian, I'm the type of person who waits to the last minute to do the things that I have to do almost always. So I would imagine Chaim Bloom won't be that way. He and his think tank there at the One Cardinal Way or whatever. I have a feeling that they have it pretty well in line. But if it were me, I would wait till I got every last little bit of information about how Ivan Herrera was progressing in his recovery from elbow surgery. How
It's too
everybody
bad,
was.
by the way, pardon me to interject, but
Yeah.
it's too bad that he had to have that surgery, and that means he probably can't play in winter ball because that would be the normal way for someone like that to get more reps behind the plate and to be evaluated in doing so. But that's probably going to be out given, his current injury situation. But sorry, go ahead.
No, that's such a great point, Brian. And that's kind of where Ivan Herrera, we started to see him take the steps as a hitter, was in the Winter League a couple of years back, where it was like, oh, wait, no, he's changed his mechanics. He's starting to hammer the ball. I think what you can use since you brought it up and since it's such a perfect illustration, like you can use that to maybe help evaluate some of the strides you want to see Yohel Pozo make before you have to make a decision on him on the 40 man. I think that you go into the year and Pedro Pajes and Jimmy Crooks are 100% locked into the 40 man, obviously. Ivan Herrera is locked into the 40 man. And I think from there, you can just say, we'll see how Pozo is. We'll see what exactly we need. Because at this point, I'm sure they know who they're going to add to the 40 man, depending on health, to protect from the Rule 5. Because that's really what it comes down to. There. So that's what I would do is I would wait till the last minute to gather as much information as I could, or to assess all the information that I had gathered at that point, and then I would make the decision from there. Because I think that all of these decisions about the 40 man and moving forward will need every little second necessary to make the move. Brian, I think
Mhm.
about the last regime and the last front office regime and how like Adam Kloffenstein, right? Uh, his arm did not recover well after surgery. So off the 40 man he went. They did this with a couple different players. And I imagine that they waited until the last minute to do it because they were just continuing to accrue, see how the development, see how the recovery from those injuries are.
I think there's
And
no doubt, and no doubt in the next month we're going to be talking about some guys coming off the back end of the 40 man. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
exactly. So, I would imagine that they're going to wait until they get every last little bit of information about the recovery of a lot of injuries before they make those decisions, not just with the catchers.
Well, what I was wondering about Herrera, and I may be getting into la la land on this one, but do they hope and have a belief that Herrera can in fact improve his catching, or do they want to create the impression across the game that he can still catch to improve his trade value? Now, I'm
Mm,
not suggesting the Cardinals should trade their best hitter this last year because that's what Ivan Herrera was, but you trade a guy while his value is highest, and Herrera hasn't proven beyond a shadow of a doubt he can't catch at the major league level yet.
yeah. Man, I hadn't thought about it like that, Brian. What a great way to approach that. For me, I would think that that is a delicate balance, but I guess if you take some of that out of it, it definitely if you come at it from that angle, it definitely keeps his stock where his stock needs to be. It's because people might have ruled him out as a catcher,
Oh, I think
and
I think they had,
yeah, yeah, and I think yeah,
and that
you
limits
bring
his
up
value.
exactly. There you go. That's it, Brian. So yeah, that's a what an astute observation, Brian.
Well, I don't know. It may be crazy. We'll have to see. Um, all right, so let's move on and talk about Baseball America. A friend of mine, Jeff Pontus, smart guy, very, very knowledgeable, very good scouting eye, wrote a series of articles. They have a metric they called Stuff Plus, which essentially measures the quality of a pitcher's arsenal. And they ran a series of articles looking at Stuff Plus for different kinds of pitches. And then they came up with here. He came up with the top 150 pitchers in the minor leagues in terms of Stuff Plus. And the Cardinals came up with four on the top 50, which is a little bit under their fair share. If you think 30 organizations, they have five. But there were some interesting names. And two of the names are guys that we talked about in terms of the trade deadline, Frank Elisalt and Nate Dome, who are still, high A kind of guys. But in terms of the measurements that BA and Elisalt especially, they like his four seamer. Um, these two guys, measured among the top stuff guys, quality of Arsenal guys in all the minor leagues. Did certainly the Cardinals must have, whether they use the Stuff Plus measurement, the Cardinals must have had some measurement like this when they targeted these guys in trade, right?
Yeah, so the Stuff Plus model has become a really big deal, and it's because everybody has their own Stuff Plus model. Like Eno Saris, who's really well respected, really well thought of in the industry, he kind of, from the consumable product standpoint for the consuming public, he's the one who kind of spearheaded the advent of Stuff Plus
And
for us to see
stuff is at the Athletic
the
primarily,
Athletic.
if you're interested.
Yeah, and so from there, everybody else, like there's a ton of people, and every publication kind of has their own version of Stuff Plus. And again, it's just a combination. Everybody measures things a little bit differently about how stuff moves, how it spins, where the arm angle is, extension. I mean, everybody kind of, but it's all kind of in the same realm. So, Brian, I think the takeaway is, as we talk about Elisalt and Dome, is to go along with Curtis Taylor and Nolan Sparks, who are the other two Cardinals, is it tells us that we have a clear indication of what the Cardinals are targeting and what they kind of went after at the deadline, which was stuff. And that's important. Stuff is important. We know stuff is important. The better your stuff is, the better you have a chance of sticking around at the major leagues and for a long time. So it is a little bit of confirmation bias of what we were hoping, and that's that the Cardinals did get some pitchers with some extremely good stuff at the deadline, and especially with extremely good stuff for their one main pitcher that they traded to the Mets, and Ryan Helsley for Frank Elisalt and Nate Dome. So that was my takeaway from it, Brian. More
Yeah.
than anything, is we're starting to see a lot of different people come up with their own models of Stuff Plus, and it's nice to see that Baseball America and Jeff, who we both respect, had this model.
Now, tell me something, Kyle. Is there a correlation between Stuff Plus and Major League success?
Oh, I'm sure there is. Okay. So on the counter to that,
So that means you and I aren't high enough on Nolan Sparks or Curtis
so
Taylor.
it's funny. I was going to say, to counter that thought, that sentiment, is I think about Bobby Miller for the LA Dodgers a lot. And Bobby Miller had some of the best Stuff Plus a couple years ago and just got rocked. And I remember Eno Saris in particular being like, he's going to sort it out. His stuff is too good not to sort it out. And he never did. And then he got hurt, and then never has since.
Yeah, but
So
sample of one.
a sample of one. He's just like the first one that comes to mind. But no, like when you go league wide, there is some type of correlation between extensive. So, like for instance, we talk about Frank Elisalt, right? Or another person we're going to get to here in a little bit, Chris Roycroft. You talk about them. If you have one pitch that is driving your Stuff Plus, like with Elisalt, his fastball, his four seam fastball drives his Stuff Plus. So if your other stuff isn't catching up to your one pitch, then that probably doesn't mean, it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to have, it doesn't project you out to have good major league success. If you have that one pitch, it might tell you a bullpen piece or
I was going
something
to
like
say
that.
it's going to more likely push you into a bullpen role,
Exactly. Which is
which
where like someone like Shen Wei Len comes in, who's really interesting because he has three or four pitches that grade out high in a lot of different Stuff Plus models. But that has a lot to do. It's usually buoyed by high velocity fastball, not necessarily by location. And we're starting to get into location plus, which is like Stuff Plus, but with location, which is a whole nother thing that is starting to factor into some people's Stuff Plus. So all of it is just to say that it does, but it doesn't. And it's all about how you're weighing down or weighing up your stuff.
thank you, Dr. Reis. An excellent dissertation.
I'm wearing a lab coat, Brian.
So, Curtis Taylor, 29, I don't know if he might have turned 30. And he's a guy that you've talked about. The Cardinals discovered his work at Driveline, brought him in. had a very, very good season with Memphis. Is this a guy you'd put on the 40 man and bring to camp knowing the Cardinals need starting pitching? I, they don't have a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
Quinn Matthews, and I don't know.
I would think that that would have happened already. Like that's kind of how my brain works. I don't think they will. And also, Brian, I don't know the terms of his contract with the Cardinals. It was either last week or the week before where I just kind of assumed that they signed him on a 1 year deal as a minor league free agent and that he might walk. But do you have any information on that?
I don't, and that's typically the way that it works. However, sometimes guys sign 2 year deals.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's options. Sometimes the organization can go to the guy and say, "Hey, Curtis, I don't have a 40 man spot for you right now, but I guarantee you, if you come to Major League camp, you're going to get a legitimate chance to start in the major leagues." And if Curtis was treated well by the Cardinals this year in Memphis, he might say, "Yeah, I'll do it." Or if he feels like, "Hey, I'd rather go back out onto the market," he might do that too. So, no, the answer in this particular case, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's hard to ignore what Taylor did this year. But as you said, he didn't get the call up in September, right? He wasn't the guy who was added to 40 man and called up. So I don't know.
Well, but Brian, the one thing that would negate this whole part of the conversation, they could just add him to the 40 man. And then it's not even a matter of if he's a minor league free agent or not. He's major league property. So,
It'd be unusual, and people were asking me recently about Brian Torres. Really great batting average guy, hits 300 every year, almost won the batting title, high on base guy, not much pop, can play second base, can play outfield, versatile guy. But he isn't the guy they added to the 40 man in September, right? They had Nathan Church, right? And they brought up
Prieto.
yeah, Cesar Prietos. Thanks.
Yeah,
Momentary brain cramp there.
it's okay.
Grab the Prevagen. Okay, but so the fact is, that Torres is behind those guys and probably won't. He's another one that might leave the organization, or maybe he'll find a way to stay on. But back to Stuff Plus for a minute. They also did top 20s by position, or excuse me, top 20s by pitch. And Luis Gastelum, not surprisingly, appeared on the changeup list. And again, to your point, one super plus pitch, but you got to have at least another one to be successful in the major leagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's Gastelum. Gastelum still needs work. He still needs to improve his fastball. And in order to get to the major leagues, he's going to need to both command the fastball and the changeup at an extreme amount, get a little bit more MPH on that fastball more than likely. And he'll probably need a third offering against righties, honestly. That slider probably needs a little bit of work or something, maybe a cutter or something. But yeah, so that there's no denying that changeup is good, Brian. But to your point, it's all about what else you're doing with it and what else you have to offer. Um, I don't know if this is the right time to segue, but one of the other, like we mentioned, one of the other pitchers that were on the top list was the two seam, the sinker of Chris Roycroft. And I think a lot of people would be surprised by that because,
Yeah,
especially because
I
of,
think folks have kind of decided maybe Chris Roycroft, isn't as great as he. I mean, his 2024, he looked really, really good, up and comer. 2025 was kind of meh, but as you said, his sinker. I think if I remember right, his sinker like graded out top in Stuff Plus in all of minor league baseball.
that's correct, Brian. You were 100% correct about that. He struggles with his secondary offering. That it's a cutter or a slider, and he just can't get it over, and that kind of negates some of the success that he can have with his sinker, and also kind of talks. It helps shade the conversation we're having about Luis Gastelum and maybe even Frank Elisalt and why you need. It's not just about having one good pitch, and we all know this. We're not, everybody knows you can't just have one good pitch unless you're Mariano Rivera. That's the only pitcher in the history of the world that had one good pitch, and that's all he needed. But it just goes to show you that if you're not commanding it exactly how you want it, sure, you might be able to throw it 70% of the time, but you need something else, and a lot of times you need a couple something else's based on the handedness of the hitter in order to have sustained major league success. Roycroft is interesting, Brian, because if you talk about the Cardinals maybe being a little bit more aggressive about holding on to some of the prospects, being a little bit more worried, holding on to some of the prospects in protection for the Rule 5, you could look at Roycroft as being one of those guys that you would take off of the 40 man, but that sinker is so good. And if you are willing to put the reins of his development into the pitching side, that you continue to pump money in the pitching development side, and you will continue to pump money into, he's the kind of guy that you do not release because of how good that sinker is. You do not try to clear through waivers because you know somebody else who's smarter than you or has a reputation of being smarter than the Cardinals have been in the last couple of years are going to seize that and try to make something out of it. It's different in season than off season, but if a team was willing to take a chance on Ryan Ludus, they'll take a chance on Chris Roycroft.
There you go. And I want to come back to that in a minute as we talk about potential non-tender candidates. But before we leave the Stuff Plus, I just want to come back to Gastelum for a minute because one of the things that I ran at the Cardinal Nation last week is the stat leaders across the system. And just to put Gastelum's season into perspective, he ranked first in games finished and saves in the system, not surprising. First in the system in expected FIP, first in the system in FIP, first in the system in strikeout rate and strikeout to walk ratio. Pretty darn good year. And, that's compared to everybody in the entire system.
Yeah. I wish he would have got a chance at AAA. I know he helped them win a AA championship, and that was awesome, but it would have been nice to see it at AAA with the Major League Baseball. And another pitcher that they're going to have a decision to make about, I guess.
Yep. All right. So last topic, MLB trade rumors, which is a very interesting site. I'm sure everybody knows about them. Have an employee who has a model that he's developed and refined over the years that looks at the amount of service a player has in the arbitration process compared to others and comes up with estimated values for arbitration salaries. And the Cardinals have nine players arbitration eligible this year. And they range from, in their estimates, from Nootbaar at 5.7, Donovan at 5.4, down to Jorge Alcala and John King at 2.1. Certainly the Cardinals could clear up some roster space by non-tendering one or two of these arbitration eligible guys.
Yeah, I guess it'll come down to John King or Jorge Alcala for that particular designation. John King's going to be really interesting because at $2.1 million, there isn't a world in which John King makes sense. But you talk about a durable lefty who does something really well, which is get ground balls. And maybe you pay him the 2.1 or whatever. You come to an agreement with him. He'd be the one that of that group, of course, because you're not going to non-tender Lars Nootbaar or Brendan Donovan. Brian, you poor man, poor man. I'm laughing at you, but I'm also very worried about you.
I muted my microphone at least, so there you go.
Good man. Poor Brian, for everybody on the pod, is dealing with the cold, and my heart goes out to him. And he's a trooper. He's answering the question, asking questions, fighting through for you guys. But yeah,
Kyle, don't non-tender me, please.
Yeah, you're a trooper. You're battle tested, Brian. I would never. We're gonna need you in the late innings, so we're gonna stick with you now through the middle innings. Try to get you to the eighth, maybe face a lefty to get for that third batter, and we'll get you through the inning. But yeah, obviously it'll come down to Alcala and King, and I would DF or I would try to get clear King, or I would try to trade King and see if maybe you could get cash considerations or something. But I like Alcala. He's got some big stuff, and I'm anxious to see what decision they decide to make on him. Because when I've spent a little bit of time over the last couple of last couple of days screwing around with the 40 man, trying to decide who I would cut and who I wouldn't. And I'm a tangled up mess, Brian. But he's one that I was very impressed with down the stretch. He's the kind of arm that's really hard to cut loose, and especially for a team in the situation that the Cardinals are in. But at $2.1 million for a reliever that you just don't know, the question is how much value do you think he has outside of the organization before
it's his last year before free agency as well. So,
yeah.
It might be that they keep him for one more year and then he'll, go out and, onto the market.
Yeah.
A number of the other guys that are arbitration eligible, as you mentioned, Nootbaar and Donovan, Palante, Gorman, Burleson, Liberatore, a number of those guys are obviously going to stay around, but the Cardinals could, and I doubt that the trade markets usually take a long time to develop, but if Bloom strikes quickly and frees up some of the roster redundancy at the position players, include some of these arbitration eligible guys, and they could free up some roster space there by making some trades.
I know that one of the questions that was asked of Chaim Bloom, I think Jeff Jones asked it, was about Tampa Bay's model and how it would. I don't remember who asked it, but it was about like, will Tampa Bay's model be something that the Cardinals kind of follow? And Heim mentioned that, the Tampa Bay model works for them, and in their unique situation. And he basically said that they'll find the Cardinals model. It won't be Tampa Bay's model. But one of the things Tampa Bay does is exactly what you're talking about, Brian, especially someone like Nolan Gorman. And he's probably a year before, but it's that second arbitration year where they would just, all right, Jesse Winker, we'll see you later. Or, it wasn't Jesse Winkler, but that's what they do. So it would stand to reason that if you think you're going to get enough value back for someone like Nolan Gorman, some of this redundancy, you would do it. Now, of course, the two guys up front, Donovan and Nootbaar, are really the pieces that you would expect to get moved to that group.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, Donovan's probably at the peak of his value right now. Nootbaar's not, although Nootbaar at least had a healthy season. He just doesn't deliver the kind of offense that you expect from a corner guy. But the other thing I would just say about the Tampa Bay model, they also don't get stuck with, three big contracts that are, difficult to move like the Cardinals have right now. So part of Bloom's inability to have a Tampa Bay kind of model is that he doesn't have a Tampa Bay kind of roster.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, yeah, no, that's it exactly.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Oh, the Arizona Fall League got underway yesterday, and Travis Honeyman batted cleanup, played center field for the Glendale Desert Dogs. I think he's going to probably be the Cardinals' priority player, so we'll probably see a lot of him. Grayson Tarlow caught. I think the six of them struck out, or two of them struck out 6 times between them. But hey, it's only the first game. And so make sure you check out our daily game recaps of the Fall League at the Cardinal Nation, as well as right now we're going through our free recaps of all the minor league teams, summaries of the seasons, and then we'll jump into our players and pitchers and relief pitchers of the year by level before closing with our system-wide awards. So a lot going on. And again, daily content, multiple articles every day at thecardinalnation.com. And Kyle and I are going to get working on the top 50 prospect list as well, because that'll start rolling out in November. So a lot going on. Stay with us. And before we close, tonight is my donor state of mind. It's a T-shirt from the state of Florida. For some reason, the Red Cross doesn't work in Florida. There's an organization called One Blood. So when I'm down in Florida, I give blood there. So make sure wherever you live, you consider giving blood and helping other people's lives.
Oh, that's awesome, Brian. Good for you. Yeah, we do here in Illinois, we do Impact Life. They do have the Red Cross, but it's a location. They have a location really close to both where Ashley and I live. So there are plenty of great organizations out there to give blood, and I recommend doing it. You get free snacks. We've talked about it before, and anytime you get free snacks, you're in for something good.
All right, there you have it. And so with that, we will close the October 8th edition of Wednesday with Walton and Reis, and we will see you mid-month on the 15th. Thanks again, Kyle.
Thank you, Brian.